Thanks again for having me in, and I've been attending most of the meetings this year anyway with Kent. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. Can the news survive? As Jim was saying, I have a lot at stake in talking about this particular topic. I hear, as mentioned, I teach journalism at Humber College. I deal with young people. There's the latest bunch of some of the graduates who showed up for their graduation ceremony about 6 weeks ago. I hear from a lot of people, the young people still want to get into the news. Is there a future for them? I had to think a lot before deciding to make a switch in my career. Do I actually want to go to a place that teaches journalism if there's no future for it? Do I want to take people's money, their parents' money, the students' hard-earned money, if I didn't think there was a return on that? The short answer, the good news is, yeah, my students are getting jobs. Because of turnovers at many of the big media outlets. The advantage of teaching journalism in Toronto is we are the media capital of the country. We've got a lot of partners and a lot of opportunities there. So really talented, really driven students are finding luck. That there's turnover, there's retiring baby boomers. There are needs in the field for certain jobs. Many are I've got the young drive. They're taking the overnight shifts on radio. They're working for Global TV, CBC, 680 News, newspapers, doing the thing that young people have done throughout their lives. You take the entry-level jobs and work your way up and try to get that. That's the short term. The medium term and the longer term, absolutely, we've got concerns about the health of the industry. There will always be a need for news. I often talk to my students about supply and demand. There's always a demand. People need to know that. You needed to know whether the roads were going to be safe with that snowfall we had this morning. Did you need to wear a heavy jacket? Could you get away with shoes and not boots? Would the snow melt by the time there? There's always a demand for news. We found during the COVID pandemic that the need for news, the demand went sky high. It was a scary time. We wanted to know what was happening. There was a lot of traffic. Measurements, we say, of people going online to look for news, watching newscasts. The demand was there. The question is always supply. Can the supply meet that demand? Not that we don't want to. It's, can we pay to keep the lights on? Can we pay people a living wage to actually produce the content that meets the demand? Or do we run the risk of people who are more than willing to produce stuff to meet the demand that might not meet the journalistic standards or ethics that we like with it? That's a topic for next year's retirement. I won't get into that much there, but that's clearly a big challenge trying to face people, it's a big challenge for those in the media industry, trying to create a stable, ongoing relationship with the consumers that are out there, providing that demand for news, trying to create that relationship and trying to get them to pay for it. And that's what we'll talk about it a little bit here. So today I want to talk you through how we got here, how the industry is changing, the technologies that have come along and ushered in a lot of these changes that we're dealing with right now. Lack of foresight, to be quite honest. A lot of people in the media industry, I don't think, saw things coming. A lot of it is, dealing with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is disrupting a lot of industries out there. Media is certainly one of them. That said, there have been some snake oil salesmen. Promises of assistance to come along that have changed or moved along. I don't want to name names, but one person comes to mind, and it rhymes with snark, Motherberg. No names there, but promising riches only to change their minds. We'll talk about Bill C-18 quite recently. This has been a very timely topic between the Google settlement last week regards to Bill C-18. Announced layoffs at my former employer, CBC, coming up here as well. We'll talk about a belated focus on regrouping and rebuilding and where we see the industry going coming forward. I want to start with a show of hands. How many, and I'll tell you how this compares to my students in a second. How many of you read a newspaper before you came here today? Okay. Is that what we call the dead tree version? To talk to the students. Did a tree die so that you could read the newspaper today? Yeah. Absolutely. You killed a tree. Yeah, you're okay. How many went online to read something? Desktop, laptop, okay. How many check their phone? Okay, all these sort of things there. How many read multiple newspapers today? Okay. Like real dead trees, more than one dead tree coming to the front door, okay. And how many watched a newscast this morning? Okay, not CP24? Okay, yeah, that's fine, CNN. How about last night? How many watched the national news of some kind, either CTV, Global, CBC, yeah, all news channels? Local news? Okay, how many listened to the radio this morning? Yeah, a lot there. Okay. Anyone listening to podcasts regularly? Couple there, all right. If I do this chat with students, it's almost a flip. There are still some that read newspapers. Their grandparents tell them that there was the thing called dead trees that you could find, but they're getting to the phone. A lot of them are depending on their phone to bring the news rather than necessarily seeking it out. We can talk about why that is and why that's a disruptive change to the industry in a little bit. Surprisingly, big challenge I have for students starting out is letting them know the various ways that news can be consumed. It's not all TikTok videos. TikTok doesn't pay. TikTok takes money, it doesn't pay. So it's a remarkable change. We're talking about it differently. Let me ask you a different question. We'll frame this a little bit differently. Why did you read a newspaper or read news online this morning before coming here? Because that has changed. The why has changed over years. So why do you pay attention to the news? What's it do for you? Curiosity. Yeah. Information, just learning things.
To cut things out of the newspaper.
Cut things out. Yeah, it's really hard to do that with an iPad. Yeah. When people were reading things like that. Saw a very funny video of a guy trying to kill a fly with a mouse iPad. It's an expensive way to kill that fly. The newspaper works the dead tree version works a lot better. To learn, to be informed, to cut things out, either to keep it for your own sake or to share with someone. There's an aspect of, hey, I read an article and I'd like to share it with someone.
And cartoons.
Cartoons, absolute cartoons, thanks, yeah. Yeah, and any other?
Well, just the currency of the information, overnight it was printed and delivered to my door. I like to get the currency and what I see on TV and other sources other than maybe I happen to do the National Post, but you can go read the blogs and look at it electronically, but I just find it's much more user friendly just to pick it up and read it and get a little more in depth. Because I find, they tell you something and you're so what? You have to go to the paper to find out so what.
Yeah, paper of record there. There's also a finite nature to reading a physical newspaper. Like you could scroll forever and never run out of things to read, but the paper, you get to the last page, put it away, or in the bin. Did you?
Instant access, like financial market.
Financial market, yeah. So finding some news there.
Also, like advertisements.
Ads of
Advertisements. Some of them are appealing and some are of interest.
I do the can the other puzzles.
The part?
I do the can puzzles.
Oh, the can puzzles things, yeah. So there are a bunch of reasons we have for why we want news in our life. What's going on, civic duty, a sense of, where is the city going, the province going, the country going, where's the world going with that? There's an economics term I use with my students, and nothing I teach is new. I'll take borrowing ideas from elsewhere as well. It's an idea called the jobs to be done framework. And it's an interesting way to look at why we get news or why we open up that app or why we subscribe to a particular channel. What is the job to be done of that newspaper? And we've talked about some of these things, or maybe it's 680 News. You're tuning into 680 News. What is the job to be done? Well, I want traffic and weather on the ones, and then know what's going on in the city. I had a specific need I was looking for, and the media outlet is providing that there. At different times in our day, we have different jobs to be done. We seek out the best tools to do that job at different times of the day. If we ask that question again with that frame of reference, we may get different answers. When you read a paper, what's the job to be done? Well, to inform us what's going on, to deliver some advertising to us is a job to be done there as well. Did I see a hand up? Yeah.
Well, I know one of the things, it's to be disappointed in Toronto sports team.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's to follow their expectations.
How about following certain columnists?
Absolutely, yeah. You build a relationship with a particular columnist, you want to find their writing over again. So not just are you being informed about the world, but you're having a relationship with someone's writing that you appreciate. That is a job to be done. We often talk about, oh, these young people, they're not, when was the last time you saw anyone reading a newspaper on the subway? Or even a book. I was on the subway yesterday and it took a book, I felt retro. Look at me reading a book on a subway instead of my phone or listening to a podcast or something. What was the job to be done that the newspaper was filling then?
So seek to open dialogue, because, people write in, I write in sometimes.
Yeah, okay, facilitating civic engagement, that's another thing as well. But in terms of reading a newspaper a decade ago, 2 decades ago on the subway, what was your job to be done? Avoiding eye contact with your fellow Torontonians, alleviating boredom, and, not sitting alone with your own thought. You want to do something. Nowadays, this is an endless source of some of those things. So a job to be done that was done with the newspaper in one context has found other devices, other things that have come in to replace that. And that's a bit of a story and a frame we can use to talk about some of these things. I want to step back in time even further. This is my grandfather, circa about 1974. I use this slide a lot with my students. It's not a good shot, I apologize. My dad called me earlier if you knew this is the shot I was using. But I like using this as a frame of reference. 1974, Burlington, he was subscribing to the Toronto Telegram. Global News wasn't on the air yet. There was no City TV, no CNN, things like that. I like going back in time there and okay, circa 1975, what was a newspaper's job to be done then? How was it different back then? What other jobs was a newspaper doing then?
Providing advertising.
Advertising. When he wanted to get rid of his old fridge, he would take a classified ad out. New thing. Doesn't happen anymore. Another job to be done there. There were so many fewer options. Is it the Telegram or the Star or the Globe? Maybe a local thing. Taking a number of things. My grandmother was getting recipes, horoscopes, sports scores, movie times. If he wanted to go see The Godfather Part 2, probably not 1974. I'm not from my dad. I'm trying to think of a 1974 movie that he would have gone to see. He would check it in the paper. That was the job to be done then. Movie reviews. It was thicker. There was more stuff in there. It also served a job, to your point, advertising. It was one of the only places for advertisers to reach him, to advertise the new cars, the new sales at Sears, or what's happening in Eaton's Flyer and things like that.
It was also where you would go to find a new job. I mean, teachers' jobs were routinely posted in the Globe and Mail, and that was the only source of finding out what positions were open.
Yeah.
Now nobody posts in print.
Absolutely. I didn't think of that. That's a great thing. Yeah, just job ads. Where did you find a job? Where did you go look for that? So many more jobs to be done that this product used to do, let alone, connecting you to the writers, the other thing, what we call the parasocial relationships, getting to know people in your community thought leaders and there as well. I want to show you a couple trends, moving on from that idea of what newspapers used to do for us and what's happened through time with it. This is a big report that came out looking at the health of the Canadian news industry. Came out in 2017, 2018, so before the pandemic, looking at the health of the news industry. This slide here, you might not be able to see at the back of the room, but you can get the gist. This looks at the decline of newspapers. For every 100 households, how many had newspaper subscriptions? And I'll point out here. So if we go back to 1950, 102 newspapers per 100 households. Wow, that's a great business. It's 2 people on the block were getting more than 1 paper around there as well. 1975, so get around the time of that slide I show my students and my grandfather. 79, still pretty good. Dropping down 49 in 1995. 18 in 2015, and then this is a projection looking past 2022. 2 households out of 100 getting the dead tree delivered to their front door. We could probably project based on the demographics here that, yeah, okay, we've demonstrated that a little bit better. So that's one slide. We'll come back and take a look at these things.
Mike,
Yeah.
can I just follow up? That's an excellent chart, very excellent.
Mhm.
Just a sample, an example. Up in Muskoka, there are 3 towns, Huntsville, Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, that no longer have a local newspaper because of Metroland.
Yeah.
Going out of business. Very sad, very unhappy people up in those 3 towns in Muskoka right now. Decline in newspapers.
Yeah.
Very sad.
And we can come back and talk about Metroland and what that means, where there's a potential rebuilding, but the huge effect that decline in coverage is going to have in that area. We'll come back and discuss some of the things. We can see that represented. It was harder to get in there, and we can talk about what else is going on as the decline comes along. In the 80s, technologies, satellite television, CNN, let alone the internet taking off, coming on. It's complicated as we look at some of these things. Here's another slide, harder to read at the back of the room. This is from the Pew Center in the United States, does a lot of study about journalism, looking at subscription rates in the US for physical papers. So yellow is the Sunday paper, the weekend paper. I always have to translate in the Toronto. It's the Saturday Star or the Saturday Globe, but we call Sunday papers in the US. Weekday is the, what's that color? Red is whatever. The not yellow color is there estimated. And we see starting in the 1940s, heyday going up, 1980s doing quite well, even in the 1990s, and then a slow decline, even 2000 holding strong. We were starting to get wired up and connected by 2000, still doing well. 2010, we really noticed a drop. Even the 2020s, and it's dropping down there as well. We can talk about some of the things that were happening in there. Newspapers doing well until 1990, a bit of a drop. We hit 2010, the economic crisis in the United States. We see the numbers dropping. There's other things going on as well. We think back to the 90s. This is the internet. I play that for my students, the sound of a 300 baud modem connecting, and they go, what is that? That was my child. I knew that. We knew that. Dialing up. Did anyone really go online in the 90s to get their news? No, because the big bulky thing, you can't take that into the bathroom with you. Sorry, not that any of us would ever do that with our phones, but you know, it wasn't portable, and the colors weren't very good. The pictures weren't great. But in the 90s, as the internet started to expand, more people got online, other sites cropped up, providing recipes and horoscopes, and taking away many of those jobs to be done that the newspapers traditionally were providing. So you didn't have to go to depend on the Toronto Star to find out, you know, who won, how the Leafs did last night. You could be disappointed by so many other sources of that information. You could start to look for jobs in other areas as well. As the internet came along, many of the jobs to be done that supported the newspapers, they started facing competition with them as well. And the media outlets were kind of slow to adapt. Did they see a lot of this change happening? No. One example I give, I had to go into the Internet Archives to get this old Globe and Mail. Many newsroom managers didn't think there was a lot of money to be made on the internet when in the 90s news sites first started putting content up online. If the Globe was selling an ad to Dell, they really wanted the physical ad in the paper. Big glossy thing. Globe, you know, decade ago invested in really good printing presses. The Globe is an excellent printed product with very clear, nice ads in there as well. They thought that was the money. That's where the money was. And in the early days, like, okay, if you buy our spread here, yeah, we got a couple kids looking at our website on that. We'll throw a Dell ad in there, and they give away the ads for free, or certainly not at the premium that later on that kind of ad space would generate. It's really hard to put a value on that kind of ad later, once you undervalued it at first. Giving away those ads are. Turns out there were some companies who were thinking differently in the 90s and thinking, well, maybe advertising is where we could generate a lot of money if we can figure out a better way to do it. Can anyone think of a company that is sort of came on scene in the late nineties and really dove deep into the world of online advertising?
The chief administrative officer with one of the biggest,
Yeah,
and it was mediconsult.com. And it was the world's third largest healthcare portals.
okay.
And it was advertising, and the .com came crashing down after
Mhm.
all these similar companies.
Did you have your own internal salespeople selling ads?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, against that, because that's also been a change because of this other company that came along, and again, that could be a topic for next year as well.
Exactly.
There's another big company that came along that sort of figured out advertising online.
Yellow Pages
Not the Yellow Pages,
switched over from printed one. Nobody gets a printed one anymore.
exactly.
They went almost entirely to online advertising. Still got the same sales force when they're just not selling paper advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you Google the name of the company that might have taken over advertising thing. Yeah, it was Google. Coming along, we know it is a search engine, but certainly it pivoted in the early aughts to really primarily focus on advertising and aggressively surveil, they call it surveillance capitalism, the ability to track us, follow us around. This is why you think your phone is listening to you when you search for an ad for shoes and you go to another website and there are those shoes following you around from various ads. As opposed to your website in the 90s, websites can create, they don't need to sell ads for themselves. They can just add a little snippet of code and Google will serve up ads, or Facebook or Amazon, any other.
They came a little later, they were more the aggregator of what we were doing.
Yeah, yeah. So we say 90s, yeah, they really got into ad business about 2002, something like that. Other companies came up with alternatives to newspaper classified ads. Craigslist, Kijiji came along here. That had a huge effect on newspapers' bottom line. Here's another slide from the Shattered Mirror. This is newspaper classified revenue, total print classified advertising revenue for Canadian daily newspapers. Again, the back of the room, here we are, 98, 99, 2000, still going strong. Even 2005, which is the year Kijiji launched, still making a lot of money through newspaper ads. As I talk to my students, just because you launch one year doesn't mean you've reached market saturation awareness. It can take a couple of years for enough people to realize, oh, I can sell that fridge on Kijiji and not have to pay the Toronto Star for it as well. So there's a bit of a lag. And boy, once that caught up, the bottom just fell out. Even from the back of the room, you can probably see how that loss of revenue was huge. There's, I don't know who's still selling some newspaper classifieds there, maybe obituaries and the odd job thing, or maybe they count the notice of developmental charge that the municipalities have to put out there. I'm not quite sure. I want to go back to the timeline as well. So this is 2005, 2006, 2007. We're noticing a big crash and a decline starting in 2009, 2010, 2011. What else was happening around this time frame that would also have an effect on newspapers' bottom line? Financial crisis happened is one thing. There's three things. It's a financial crisis in the US. These are Canadian numbers, so we were a bit sheltered in there. Something else came along, was introduced 2007. Yeah, in your pocket, the portable internet device. I initially went portable internet device. I can see the phone and the music. That's why I was interested with that. Took away many of those intangibles of the newspaper. Jobs to be done. Okay, and as it expanded, as more apps and things came along, replaced a lot of stuff. It became a very convenient way to access the news. You don't need to sit down at a desktop computer or open up a laptop. Just turn it on, tap it away, and you can get your news. Something else was starting to take off around that time as well. The third factor.
The telephone business started picking up good internet, so you could pick it up.
Yeah, well, certainly mobile delivery, things like that. Rise of social media, specifically for Facebook. It's been around 2004, 2005, 2006. It expanded beyond just Harvard and U.S. schools and was expanding. By 2008, 2009, it was really starting to make inroads into the general population. people sharing and moving around there. Followed later by Twitter, which launched 2008. Instagram, I think 2011, that TikTok more recently. The ability to connect with your friends, share pictures, stories, updates, whereas you would have cut things out of the newspaper to hand to someone, you can just click a button and share it. Like, hey, I read a story you might like. That whole social sharing was an important part of things. How many of you are on Facebook? Out of curiosity. Yeah. Oh, you were, yeah, that's right. Do you know, anyone know where it ranks in terms of popularity around the world? Maybe not this demographic, but around the world. I'll show you a slide showing the ranks of the world's most popular social networks. Closing in at almost 3 billion users monthly worldwide is Facebook, Facebook proper, followed by YouTube, which is owned by Google. 2.5 billion people use it monthly, which are staggering numbers. What are the two things? One of you is on Facebook and YouTube. Followed by WhatsApp, which is a chat app, very popular in Europe and South Asia, some here in Canada, also owned by Facebook. Followed by Instagram, 2 billion users, photo sharing, also owned by Facebook. Then we've got WeChat, TikTok, I'm sure that has increased a little bit. Facebook Messenger, owned by Facebook. I'm going to join in Telegram, Snapchat, other things there. Notice anything missing from that list?
Email.
Email, but in terms of social network. Twitter.
X, but it's way down.
X, yeah, I'd have to extend it to 14th spot. Yeah. Down there, right above Pinterest, I think, 14 on the list.
How current is it?
This was, that's not said 24. I believe this was either 2022 or January 2023 is where I got this from. This is before.
Twitter's lost since then.
Oh yeah, this is before Elon.
Yeah.
But even then, Twitter was not nearly as popular as journalists and other people on Twitter made you think it was.
Yeah, it was a journalist talking to each other.
Yeah, I show a picture of an old press club gallery meeting, and I tell my students, it was popular amongst journalists because they like to yap to each other about the news, thinking the rest of the world is using it as well, and they do not. Twitter was not a super popular one. It wasn't a super popular driver of traffic to websites, other than journalists saying, I did this, you know, commenting on things. So it's way down there, and I would argue it's dropping even further based on what Mr. Musk is doing about that. But that's a topic for next year's retirement. This just shows Facebook's meteoric rise. You know, this is starting Q308 going up to where it is with that billion, 3 billion users there as well. 2.9 billion monthly active users. 86% of people aged 18 to 29 are using Facebook. 77% of people 30 to 49, 51 in the 50 to 65 range, 34% of those 65 and others. So it's cutting across demographics fairly well. 54-46 in terms of gender, 54% female. On average, Facebook users spend 35 minutes a day on that. In Canada, 60% of people check Facebook once a day. With that penetration, seeing where things were going, many media outlets said, we got to get on Facebook, start sharing our news on that. And they met a very willing company saying, yeah, we want to help you get your news on Facebook. I was involved with CBC with one of the first projects Facebook had partnered with the media outlet, and they were very keen, 2007, to work with the media. You might see where I'm going with this conversation, to work and say, yes, let's work with, you know, get your stuff on, we'll work with you, we'll make it easier for you to go live, do all sorts of stuff. And why not 2.9 billion monthly users? These were numbers from 2017. It's important we put a number on these as well. A Reuters digital news report from 2017. The #1 place Canadians were going to get their news at that point online. Facebook, Google, 76%. That includes social media. Just social media itself. This could also mean Google, going to Google News. Supposed to, you know, watching the news, TV, listening to the radio, getting a print subscription. So it was a popular place to go to. Many news outlets thought they were reaching, though, a Faustian bargain They would post their stuff, they would let people share it, and they would depend on that to generate content. Turns out it wasn't them who got rich. They often talk that it's many publishers view doing business with Facebook as a sort of Faustian dilemma. They can get rich, but they might lose their souls. Part of it is they were giving up a lot of control. Facebook uses an algorithm to figure out what to turn, how many cat pictures to send you. They'll give you an update of what's going on here, over there. And it depends on, do people find it popular? Or what is the flavor of the month that they want to put up with you as well? And the more and more media outlets started putting their stuff on Facebook, thinking, great riches, people will view this stuff and then they'll go to our website and they'll see our ads for Dell computers and we can rake in all sorts of money by showing them those Dell ads on our websites. Didn't work out that way for many things. Facebook was also changing the terms of the deal a lot. It changed its algorithm several times in the teens, downplaying news at some points, changing the algorithm a lot. At one point, there was something in the media, they call it pivot to video. Facebook wanted to compete with YouTube, so it actually went out to the New York Times, several US outlets, and said, young people these days, they aren't clicking on the news items anymore. You got to put video on our platform. And print journalists were laid off and companies invested in video production, thinking this is what young people want. They do that. Facebook made up the numbers about engagement. And within a year, or relatively so, changed its mind. Great for Facebook. It's got 2.9 billion people it can always fall back upon. Not so good if you are a struggling news outlet trying to figure out how best to get your content out there. You can't, how many of you are in business? You can't plan business and long-term growth and strategy when your partner changes their mind so quickly, turning around. There's a lot of job losses, 2015, 2016, related to this, changing its algorithm to determining people were seeing less news, more cats, vacation photos. Suddenly news outlets couldn't be guaranteed that if they were posting their news online, people who signed up to Facebook would follow up and see that or even go to the website. There's a phrase in social media called TLDR. Too long didn't read. And if you're just getting your news by doing this, you might get a headline and go, oh, Doug Ford did something. Oh, Trump said something crazy again. It's too long, didn't read it. But just relying, okay, I'll just get the gist of it. If you've talked to a young person, you know what it's like to talk to someone who's just got the very gist of the news with that as well. So there were cases, journalists, even news outlets going out of business because of this. Meanwhile, advertisers who used to advertise with the media outlets found they could still reach people, just not advertising with the media outlets, but sending their ad dollars to the social networks that were doing all this. We saw a huge shift in advertising from traditional media to online outlets like Facebook or Google. Here's another slide from Hugh. The previous slide was looking at newspaper subscriptions. This is ad revenue, total revenue for US newspapers in US dollars. And again, from the back of the room, 1960s, 1970s, look, boom times of the 80s and the 90s. There's the early 90s recession right there. Then it picked up again. And then the economic, with the dot-com crash in the end of the, but then doing really well up until about the financial crisis in the United States. Then dropping. Also, during the financial crisis, we had the rise of social and the rise of mobile. New companies coming in, taking a lot of that revenue, that ad revenue, and here's the projection going down. There's a funny comment I saw online about this slide. When this chart came out, some people photoshopped it and said, you know what, like the Rorschach test. If I look at that graph, there's something else I see in it. In the past 10 years, we've seen, faced with all these crises, many newspaper chains just shutting down. They can't make a go of it. The advertising revenue not there, subscriptions down. As you were talking about, Metroland a couple of years ago, trying to consolidate and just pulling out of the dead tree delivery business some more. The jobs to be done, moving and moving on. Former Washington Post media critic, now Professor Margaret Sullivan, wrote a book a couple of years ago called Ghosting the News that looked at the effect on democracy, on civic society, what happens in local communities when newspapers shut down. She was a former editor at the Buffalo News, I believe, as well. There have been studies, I've read these studies that have shown that there's a correlation equals causation. Communities that have lost their local news have seen increases in municipal government costs and corruption at the local city hall. Because there isn't that ink-stained wretch keeping an eye on all the municipal council meetings going, why'd you single source that contract? What's going on here? So this civic angle of journalism, keeping an eye on things, has had a demonstrable effect on many US cities where this is happening. We're seeing this happening across Canada as well. Unfortunately, one exercise I do with my students is go through the map of Canada, tracking newsroom closures, things that have come around. Bring back home, this is a bit of the context that led to the introduction of Bill C-18, which was the government's attempt to try to get Facebook, Google to compensate news outlets for this loss of revenue. That's a whole other talk about whether it's an effective bill, and I think it's a deeply flawed bill, but I support the idea that there were two large monopolies that were, something needed to be done. I think the answer was in regulation, interoperability. There's other ways you could have gone about this. But with Google and Facebook taking all the ad revenue, Bill C-18 said, you're going to have to pay back some of that money to the news outlets that are sharing. Facebook's response was to just say, not me, to pull out. You no longer share news stories on Facebook or Instagram. That was their way out of this legislation that would have forced them to start writing a check to the National Post, the Toronto Star, or negotiate in a very complicated way how to do this. It was just last week that Google reached a deal with the Canadian government. Again, to technically get out of the enforcement, but they're just going to write a big check and a finite amount of checks. So $100 million will go into a fund, and that will be divvied up to go around there.
Mike, I was listening to a news story this morning that people on Facebook and they want to share, like their mom died or whatever, and Facebook won't put it up anymore.
Don't put it
if it came from a newspaper, you can't share it to Facebook.
Can't share little things like that. This is the Humber College student Instagram account. We were locked out. So it made me easier. I just dropped a couple lectures that I was going to talk to my students about how to promote stuff on social media, which I was fine to do if you can't tell with it as well. But this continues a trend. Facebook had been pulling away from promoting news. This is Slate magazine. This is even from 2017 to 2018 after an algorithm change, showing that fewer people were seeing news on that because Facebook was twiddling away at the dials. No control. Publishers would think they're putting their things up. They have no control, no guarantee that people who would follow them on that would ever see that. Facebook has said, oh, we've stopped sharing news in Canada. It's had no effect on the bottom line. Of course, it's very disingenuous because they long courted media outlets and say, oh, we don't need you anymore. They just twiddle their metaphorical dials and you see more cat pictures or ads for, in my case, my feed, Star Wars collectibles, but that's just me. But I will never notice that there's not news there because Facebook has always got something else to show me. And they said people are still engaged with that. Had Google shut off Canadian news, it would have been catastrophic. But Google is a different company from Facebook. And a lot of the authority and credibility that Google gets is, what's the job to be done for Google? When I want to know what's going on in the world, I type in my search and you answer that. And if you don't have access to news to back that up, that would hurt Google. So it's not surprising that the Google would.
What did you think of the final outcome of that? I mean, it seemed to be face saving on the government's part when Facebook just says, shove it where the sun don't shine. And Google said, we offered you $1 million a year ago or $100 million a year ago.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it because we're going to go as well. Yeah. And the Canadian government grabbed it because they said, well, we need it to, I guess, cover the severance costs at CBC. But,
yeah, it'll be
knows.
Yeah, no,
how much was anybody actually going to see of it?
Yeah, I think it goes into a fund that gets distributed, and Canadian media has got a long-standing relationship applying for government funds, whether it's TV production funds and money from Rogers and Bell, that, you know, things there. So it was complete climb down. And it was a face-saving, thank God there was something there. So that, because from what I understand of the bill is, by paying this, the bill is all but useless because there's no one left to enforce. Because they wrote a deal, they're a check, they're exempted from the rules. And since Facebook is no longer distributing news, there's no one left to be caught.
If the government waits long enough,
Yeah.
and applies its huge administrative fees, there'll probably be no one to distribute to it.
Yeah. I actually think the Facebook ban is a bit of a blessing in disguise for media outlets, because it reminds them of that bad Faustian dilemma that they had with it, and they should be looking for more alternatives. And this is what I talk a lot about my students with. What does the post-social media world look like? We've seen Musk imploding, Twitter there as well. This involves going directly to customers again. Whereas they may have sat back in a lost decade of thinking, no, people will just come to us through social media. They'll find all we need through social media. Going back, finding them directly, building a relationship with them, being responsive to what they need, without depending on Facebook or Twitter or Google to reach them, finding new ways that they can control as well. I want to ask you another thing I could have had. How many people subscribe to email newsletters? Besides, of course, Glenview's, things like Glenview, yeah. So this is a real growth area, and it's an everything old is new again approach that many outlets are using. I think you talked about various social networks. People talk about that. Email. Tend not to think of it as a social network, but it is one of the most personal things you have online. The spot where your information comes into, you come to, and you control it. And there's a big push, and you may have noticed a big push for many media outlets to get you to subscribe to a newsletter. Substacks, other things. Yeah, that's one particular brand there, but Globe and Mail's got a suite of newsletters you can subscribe to. Toronto Star, coming in early in the morning, people working the overnight shift just to fire off that automated email for you at 6 a.m. so that when you wake up at the coffee, you check your email and like, oh, look, what's Olivia Chow up to now? To click through there, new engagement things. Far better for the newspaper or the media outlet than relying on Facebook, because they're sending you a finite package of stuff and they know who you are and they'll track it. It's a real growth area and a strategic thing. And it gets into trying to build a relationship with you, coming in over and over again. The more you see the content, the more you engage with the content you like, maybe the more likely you'll actually hand over the credit card at some point and subscribe. So it's a bit of a long game. A lot of media outlets, as they're rebuilding, are figuring this out. In the replacing Metroland, the big challenge Metroland has is driving traffic to its local sites again, letting people know. The best advertisement for the fact that someone was covering your local city hall was seeing the coverage of the local city hall show up wrapped around Metro's grocery lists, specials for that week and Best Buys things. But those jobs to be done have moved on. So we're going to see newspapers in Montreal were able to recover a little bit from the Facebook ban by upping up their old traditional advertising, reminding people, hey, we're here. I see bus ads from the CBC saying, we're here. Just because you can't see us on Facebook. They're not saying that, but take our app, download our app, harder sales. But it's about building that relationship, hoping to get subscriptions. Also is going to be more paywalls. The Wall Street Journal is what I tell my students is a hard paywall. You can't go onto that website unless you're paying. But it's got the exclusive financial information and people with expense accounts that can pay to do that as well. But the Toronto Star, the Globe, you'll see them like giving away a couple, but if you surf a lot online, you'll encounter a lot of the, you've used up your 5 articles for the month. Please consider subscribing and helping us out. Or they cut deals with something like Apple News, which if you pay, acts as an aggregator and gives you access to some things behind. So other future directions, we're seeing explosions of podcasts. If you're not into those yet, they are a lot easier for media outlets to monetize, get a better sense of what is working with their audience and what's not. The other thing is when you're just distributing content through social media, you have to rely on social media to tell you whether people liked it or not. There's a lot of loss of analytics and you don't know, could we actually find an audience that will grow because they like this kind of coverage or these kind of stories? There's far more control media outlets are realizing belatedly, we gave away too much of our product for free. We need to take a little bit more control. We're seeing an explosion of much more smaller, more nimble sites run by maybe 1-2 journalists out of their basement, trying to cover local communities. I talk to my students a lot about this. They're going to have an assignment in January where they've got to come up with a business case for a media outlet from scratch and how they'll go about trying to reach and engage with an audience. We're telling our students, your future might not be writing for the Globe and Mail. It might be starting to write a small newspaper, a small newsletter in hopes of growing it into something. We have seen into the vacuum left by Metroland closing, smaller startups serving, Peterborough, Guelph, small journalists just trying this one-on-one, going around trying to reach new customers directly, supported by local ads, reader subscriptions. You mentioned Substack, which is a platform that lets writers make a go of it. I subscribe to people like Paul Wells, no longer with Maclean's, but to follow him. He's one of the people I pay to follow on Substack, directly subsidizing. My students starting out can't do that because they don't have a reputation of something like that, but there are new ways to use the technology. Bottom line, a lot of media outlets admit they haven't figured this out at all. No one really has the answers. There's a lot of experimentation going on. How many all news channels does Toronto have? We all know of CB24. Did you know City TV, Global, and soon CBC are all going to have 24-hour local television news channels? It's something called FAST, free ad-supported streaming television. Amazon will deliver Global's all news channels there as well. The idea that you need cable to get CP24 or CBC News Network or CNN, there are new ways to get technology and get content with you. They're trying to figure these things out as we go along. Streaming services, podcasts, other ways to reach customers, target you with advertising. Then, of course, there's the big unknown threat. With big trustworthy outlets being banned by Facebook, there's a danger social media could be overrun by fake news, misinformation, or websites written by generative AI services like ChatGPT. The head of BBC wants writing. I think this is going to change journalism more in the next 3 years than journalism has changed in the last 30 years. The idea of generative AI, computers that can write. A big topic that I've handled with my students. Again, for next year's Retired Men's Club. But I almost think it could lead to a rise in what I call artisanal media. If so much of the garbage we go online to see is automated, computer-generated stuff, could that usher in a role for artisanal, handcrafted journalism, the old-fashioned way of looking, where you can say to your audience, this was not generated by a computer. I actually went out and covered that city council meeting, and I was there, and come and follow it, and topic for things. So can the news survive? Yes, but it will have to change because it has to change. So with that, take some questions. I don't know how much time we have left, but like it.
Where did the great editorial writers from the Peterborough Examiner and the Kingston Whig Standard, where have they gone? Those people were leaders in the use of English, apart from that, and writing thoughtful things that I haven't seen them at all, and they haven't. I don't think they've gone over to the electronic services, have they?
Yeah, heartbreaking with what's happened with the Kingston Whig Standard. That was a small local community supported paper that punched above its weight in terms of coverage and editorial thing like generations ago there. So I don't know with layoffs and as those many of those smaller papers have got a skeletal staff, or the editorial pages could be syndicated. One person writes it and it's just spread across the country. I don't know if there's the local knowledge staff. So I don't know what happens, whether it's just attrition, retirement, making it hard to go, people leaving the industry. Like many industries, there's been an issue with journalists leaving or crossing over into PR. So maybe an editorial writer is now writing press releases for Kingston General Hospital. I don't know. Which would be an awful waste of that person's time. Yeah.
The demise of Metroland, like many people, the way I find out about it is it just stopped coming.
Mhm.
But I noticed all their flyers are now being delivered by, it took a few weeks, but it's now coming in our post.
Yeah.
But are they going to go electronic or did they actually close down completely?
They're just finalizing the layoffs, because I have a couple students who lost their jobs for
Right.
that. I think they're putting their focus on their online sites, which they had been running for a while. They do have competition in the local online space. There's another successful company that we tell our students about called Village Media. We don't hear much about it in Toronto, but Sault Ste. Marie is the site of the local news revolution in Canada right now. A company based out of Sault Ste. Marie called Village Media that has figured out a local online economic model with local ads that actually has gone into many communities where the Guelph Mercury shut down, and have started up these little sites. They are just starting to nip at the GTA. I noticed they are hiring local reporters for Burlington and Oakville. They have a service that covers Queen's Park that they took over there, but they were deeply hurt by the Facebook ban because local community discussion groups are a big area where Facebook was used a lot to share news. Like it could be the North Toronto community group and people sharing dog walking services and, oh no, there's an assault on Yonge Street and Merton, be careful there. People sharing that when you can no longer share that kind of stuff on Facebook. That hurts a lot of local publishers, and Village Media was outspoken in its criticism of Bill C-18. That's a model, and I actually have exercised it with my students where we compare Metroland and Village Media to see how they're both trying to do this sort of hyper-local coverage of local communities. So I rambled there. That Metroland will see in 2024 really focus a lot on the local stuff. But as you mentioned, will you know that it's there? Will that enter your news routine? I know the Toronto Star reconfigured its website to push out a lot of the links to the Metroland coverage there.
You were, in one of your graphs, you're showing the newspapers in Toronto, and you said down to 2 or 3, where do these things stand? Like, how many newspapers, big ones, and how long do they stay around there? And how many of them are actually computerized and digitalized?
Toronto is odd in that we have 4 dailies still, and that bucks the trend in most North American cities or any city. In fact, we get 2 local focus, the Sun and the Star, but with the National Post and the Globe here. There are certainly financial challenges facing them all. No one is healthy. A lot of it is the ownership structure, which, my eyes glaze when I get into, bonds and investment firms that own those companies. But, so Toronto Star has got, its parent company owns a sports betting site, and on the website, you'll find links to North Star bets. The jobs to be done of newspapers and of news sites in 2023 now include anything they can to generate revenue. I was talking to a colleague before coming here, and we were planning a class trip to go visit Spacing magazine, which is an odd thing in Toronto. It's a magazine focusing on urban design that launched 20 years ago and is still publishing. Which, kudos anything that still managed to do that, but it's diversified its income. It has a gift shop and runs a store in the same area that does a good brisk business selling books related to urban design and Toronto tourism, unique gifts and things like that. So media outlets can't just rely on ads or things, merchandising is one thing. Many big outlets, the Atlantic magazine, Verge, will run conferences and bring in their thought leaders, and people will pay to come see them. They're trying to diversify, and the healthy news outlets going forward will find more than one way. Subscriptions, ads, but then find other things. For the Toronto Star, that means bankrolling with sports betting. For the longest time, though, Harlequin Books supported the Toronto Star. It was the publisher behind Harlequin Books until that was sold off. Yeah,
Can I, just a quick question, the magazines such as Maclean's Time, are they still in survival mode? And are they considered newspapers, or they're really magazines? Maclean's and Time.
Yeah, different economies with things there. I think I heard yesterday Reader's Digest is ceasing publication. They're facing challenges with them. There's a different relationship. People are you know, they can give away a lot of their content for free and that can kind of hurt, but it's hard to, yeah, I get appeals from the Walrus and all sorts of other magazines to subscribe, to me there. Yeah, everyone is hurting with attentions and things. Many of them, I think McLean's, you know, was it monthly now, maybe even weekly, just publishing less and trying to consolidate.
Right?
Yeah,
National Geographic seems to be bucking the trends. They're still turning out a magnificent magazine every month.
Mhm.
Thick and very deep articles. It might take a month to prepare some of these articles.
yeah, could be worldwide distribution.
Yeah,
The New York Times is doing quite well, bucking the trend of that slide I showed with subscription. It's really grown with international or online subscriptions. A lot of those international ones. The New York Times is like the world's paper, and it's got a lot of subscriptions from there. So I suspect that might be part of National Geographic's appeal, that it's, you know, across the English-speaking world.
you know, photography.
Okay, I think, the time has come. We thank, Mike very, very much. It was a great talk, very, very informative. And, I was thrilled to know that you've got about 10 or 12 more talks to come up. This is very. Thank you.
I think we mentioned March 7th.